Dumbledore's post-publication homosexuality. After the Harry Potter books were completed, author J.K. Rowling publicly stated that Albus Dumbledore, the headmaster of Hogwarts, was gay. This information was not revealed in the original 7 books or shown in the film adaptations. Because of this, many saw the announcement as retroactive continuity, meaning a change or addition to a character's backstory made after the main story has been told. Supporters viewed it as a progressive step toward LGBTQ representation, even if it was not shown directly. Critics argued that because it was absent from the original text, it felt like a symbolic gesture rather than authentic storytelling. This debate became a central example in discussions about whether adding diverse traits to a character after publication is meaningful or performative. The controversy intensified when subsequent adaptations, including the Fantastic Beasts film series featuring a younger Dumbledore, still failed to explicitly portray his sexuality on screen. Many fans felt disappointed that what was promised as representation remained invisible in the actual storytelling. The situation highlighted broader industry challenges around LGBTQ visibility in mainstream media, where studios often hesitate to include explicit queer content due to international market concerns. The pure-blood supremacy analogy. The main political conflict in Harry Potter centers on Voldemort and his followers, who seek to keep the wizarding world pure by excluding and oppressing Muggle-born wizards. They use the slur mudblood to insult those with non-magical parents. This setup mirrors real-world systems of racial discrimination and extremist ideologies such as fascism. The books present this ideology as both morally wrong and socially destructive, creating a direct allegory for racism. In this interpretation, the war against Voldemort is not only a battle against one villain, but a rejection of supremacist thinking in all forms. The clarity of the parallel has led some to describe it as a deliberate woke narrative device. However, critics have pointed out inconsistencies within the wizarding world's own systems of oppression. House elves remain enslaved throughout most of the series, with their liberation treated as a minor subplot rather than a central moral issue. The Goblin community faces systematic exclusion from wand ownership and full participation in wizarding society. Yet these injustices receive little attention compared to the Muggle-born persecution. Some scholars argue that while Rowling condemns one form of prejudice, she inadvertently reinforces others through her world-building choices, suggesting the anti-discrimination message may be more selective than initially apparent. Hermione's characterization. Hermione Granger is portrayed as highly intelligent, academically successful, and morally principled. She is often the voice of reason within the trio of main characters and regularly takes the lead in solving problems. In later books, she also becomes a campaigner for social justice causes, such as her effort to improve the treatment of house elves through the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare, SPEW. Supporters see her as a strong, positive female role model who embodies both intelligence and compassion. However, critics have called her a Mary Sue, a term for a character who is unrealistically perfect or morally flawless. This critique argues that her role as a constant moral compass reflects a politically correct ideal that can be seen as part of a woke agenda in fiction. The debate intensifies when considering that Hermione's activism is frequently dismissed or ridiculed by other characters, including her closest friends. Her SPEW campaign becomes a source of mockery rather than meaningful social change, potentially undermining the progressive message supporters claim to see. Additionally, some feminist scholars argue that despite her intelligence, Hermione often serves primarily as support for Harry's heroic journey rather than pursuing her own independent narrative arc. This dynamic raises questions about whether her characterization truly challenges traditional gender roles or simply packages them in a more palatable, ostensibly empowered form. Diversity in the wizarding world. The Harry Potter books include characters from different backgrounds, but diversity is not a major focus in the original text. Most named characters are white, and characters of color have limited roles. In later years, J.K. Rowling and adaptations like the play Harry Potter and the Cursed Child introduced more visible diversity. One major example was the casting of a black actress as Hermione in the stage play. Some welcomed this change as long overdue representation, while others criticized it as inconsistent with earlier portrayals or as an attempt to meet modern diversity expectations without rewriting the source material. This has fueled broader debates about whether diversity in adaptations should stay faithful to the original descriptions or evolve with cultural standards. The controversy deepened when Rowling retroactively suggested that Hermione's race was never explicitly stated in the books, despite textual references to her white face in moments of fear. This sparked discussions about colorblind casting versus intentional representation, with some arguing that meaningful diversity requires deliberate inclusion from the beginning rather than post-publication reinterpretation. The power of love as a weapon. In the series, the idea that love is the most powerful magic is repeated as a central truth. Harry's survival as a baby is explained by his mother's self-sacrifice, which leaves him protected from Voldemort's killing curse. This concept returns in later books, where emotional bonds, such as friendships and loyalty, help the heroes overcome danger. Rather than relying solely on spells or combat skill, the story frames empathy, compassion, and care for others as decisive forces in defeating evil. Supporters see this as a universal moral message that elevates emotional intelligence. Critics, however, argue that it oversimplifies the nature of conflict, replacing strategic or physical struggle with an idealized moral principle. This interpretation often gets labeled woke because it prioritizes kindness and emotional connection as the ultimate solution over force. However, this theme becomes complicated when examined alongside the series' actual resolution methods. The final defeat of Voldemort still relies heavily on magical technicalities, dueling prowess, and Harry's willingness to sacrifice himself, suggesting that love alone may be insufficient without accompanying action and strategic thinking. The subversive nature of authority. Throughout the books, authority figures and institutions are shown as flawed, corrupt, or incompetent. The Dursleys abuse their guardianship of Harry. The Ministry of Magic ignores Voldemort's return and later becomes an oppressive regime. Even Hogwarts has blind spots, as seen in its inability to protect students from certain dangers. The protagonists frequently bypass these institutions to act independently, sometimes breaking rules to do what they believe is right. This recurring portrayal challenges the assumption that authority is trustworthy by default. Supporters see this as a realistic depiction of how power can fail and how individuals must take moral responsibility. Critics see it as part of a broader cultural message to distrust traditional institutions, which they connect to woke skepticism toward established power structures. This anti-establishment theme resonates particularly with young readers who may already question adult authority, reinforcing generational tensions about respect for traditional hierarchies. Voldemort's backstory as a parable. The series reveals Voldemort's early life in detail, showing him as Tom Riddle, a child raised in a Muggle orphanage without affection or a stable family. His lack of love and connection is presented as a factor that shaped his inability to feel empathy and his eventual turn toward evil. This framing suggests that personal history and environment can strongly influence a person's moral path. Supporters see it as a layered approach that explores the roots of hatred. Critics argue that it risks excusing his crimes by overemphasizing social and psychological factors instead of focusing on personal accountability. This type of villain origin story is sometimes viewed as part of a woke trend toward explaining, rather than purely condemning, wrongdoing. However, the books simultaneously show other characters overcoming similar hardships, suggesting that circumstances alone don't determine moral choices and preserving individual responsibility. The role of the other. Many characters in the Harry Potter universe are marginalized because they are considered different from the human wizarding majority. Werewolves face prejudice and legal restrictions. Giants are feared and excluded. House elves are treated as servants with few rights. In each of these cases, the narrative shows sympathetic perspectives and condemns discrimination. Some storylines, such as Remus Lupin's struggles as a werewolf, parallel real-world experiences of stigma and social exclusion. Supporters argue that these subplots encourage empathy and promote equality. Critics describe them as deliberate attempts to insert modern social justice themes into a fantasy world, making them a key example of how otherness in the series aligns with woke messaging. Yet the series inconsistently addresses these injustices, with some groups like House Elves remaining largely oppressed despite occasional acknowledgement of their mistreatment throughout the narrative.